Hello friends, I'm Su. Today I'm going to continue with the topic of the balance between reason and emotion. I want to start with talking a bit about Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy. In Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy, he distinguishes between the Apollonian art and the Dionysian art. Apollo and Dionysus, they were both gods from ancient Greek mythologies, and they were both sons of Zeus. And Apollo was god of sun, and Dionysus was god of wine. The Apollonian art represents rational, visible art, like for example, sculpture, paintings, constructions, and the Dionysian art represents passion, emotion, and other irrational forces, typically in the form of music or dances. Nietzsche actually sees the ancient Greek tragedy as the perfect duality of Apollonian and Dionysian art that brings two forms of art together into perfect collaboration. But I don't see it in this way, actually. In my opinion, in tragedy, actually, emotion still overcomes reason. That the reality is not evolving in a perfectly rational way. Something wrong happened, something very irrational happened, and actually it starts to dominate, and it conquers reason somehow, and ended up in the form of tragedy. Because even Plato believed that the relation between reason, emotion, and desire is like a horseman driving a cart, that reason is a horseman, and a passion or emotion, so to speak. I think he uses passion. And passion and desire are like two horses that are running. And as a horseman, you must keep the two horses in order, not one like running crazy, like to a random direction that becomes out of your control. What is the perfect duality between Apollonian and Dionysian art, or between reason and emotion, so to speak, is something I want to talk about later. And right now I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about popular culture, actually. If you look at 1970s, you have a lot of beautiful popular music, actually. For example, the Beatles, like, "Hey Jude, don't make it bad, take a sad song." Or in Germanic popular culture, there are also many beautiful songs, like "Nein, sorg dich nicht mich, du weißt, ich liebe das Leben." I'm not a singer, so I'm not going to sing many songs to you, but just give you some examples. But my point is, nowadays, it's very hard to see songs like that in the 1970s. Nowadays, everything is more like boom, 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 like that's how it works nowadays. So-called DJ music, so to speak. Also nowadays, people are obsessed with making photos, taking selfies, and make HD video, make the perfect computer effects, make it very visibly attractive, etc. And compared to the 1970s, things in our time becomes much more superficial, much more visually attractive, but is losing their human essence, losing the soul compared to old time. The similar thing also happened in China, but the difference is the age of so-called the Great Renaissance of Chinese popular culture happened actually in the 1990s, especially in the early 1990s. There was a burst of loads of greatest popular music, popular TV series, popular arts, etc., that really bear very strong spirit. It's called true emotion, true humanity, that is very strong, very truly, that is also very touching, that penetrates deeply into your soul. But nowadays, things just go as the same as in the West, and everything becomes superficial. Everything loses essence, loses spirit, and music become, in my opinion, feels like a noise, and so negative, doesn't contain the truly human emotion. It's quite dispirited, and people focus so much on making a perfect selfie, perfect picture, which is fake, just to show off to everyone. And just when you leave the camera, you become like garbage, and everything is about to show off to others, to make a perfect, to fake a face, to stage a thing that is not real. In South Korea, things go even more extreme, that the popular stars are so obsessed with making perfect picture, perfect presentations of visibility in front of camera, and this causes problems because some people, the audiences, become so perverted, and they start to put illegal cameras to spy on these popular stars' private life, and of course it's not something very nice, but because people want to consume this perfect visibility, they want to consume it, they want to destroy it, then it actually causes many popular stars in South Korea to commit suicide. They can't stand it. They can't stand this contrast, this kind of extreme contradiction that breaks their mentality. So I would say that in the 1970s West or in the 1990s China, that the society was actually reaching a kind of good balance between reason and emotion, a good balance between Apollonian and dilution art. But nowadays, in our time, in the 21st century, in the 2023, or since 2010 now, this balance was lost. It has something to do with the technical advancement and the capital control, the extreme capital control, the capital manipulation of the culture industry. This process is something I want to call, is something I want to term as the spatialization of time. The spatialization of time. Because time has a lot to do with our inner feeling, with our inner senses, our soul, our spirit, our true emotions. It's all being expanded and exposed and being processed and expressed with our inner feelings, with our inner time consciousness. As Immanuel Kant states, that time is a pure form of our inner intuition. and space is the pure form of our external intuition. And if the sense of inner intuition is lost, then we only have the external one, and then we become spatialized, become objectified. It doesn't make us more reasonable. Spatialization doesn't mean rationalization. Not in a way that you make yourself rational, make yourself become reasonable in holding yourself, in making yourself more under your control. But spatialization may be considered as a sort of external rationalization. An external rationalization is you're being objectified and rationalized through an external force that is not within your control. Your subjectivity is lost in this process. Your self-consciousness is lost in this process. It's an external rationalization. It's more like a ghost. It's more like Hegel's this absolute spirit or something like that. An external ghost that is rationalizing you as a given brainless material, because you are not using your own subjectivity in this process. You are not using your own rationality to draw upon your emotion to reach a balance within your mind. Then your inner reason is actually replaced by a fake external rationality that pretends to be yours, that pretends to rationalize your mentality, your emotion, but actually controls you, manipulates you, and commodify your mentality eventually. You become obsessed with external fantasies, fake images of yourself that deeply in your mind you know it's fake. But at certain points you want to deceive yourself even more, that you start to make more and more fantasies, create more and more pictures of yourself or with others, to create some fake so-called romantic moments, which you know that is not real, but you create these fake images anyway to convince others that, it's real. But others don't care, and they know it's not real, but they pretend that they are convinced, or it is real anyway. And then people just start to pretend to each other and fake themselves to each other. It's a very huge bubble. And the only thing that is in common between these people in the bubble is that all of them lost their inner spirit and become like sort of zombies, manipulated and controlled and commodified by their capitals, so to speak. It's a prolonged and carefully designed form of alienation that most people from middle class didn't realize at all until certain moments. They are not middle class anymore. These financial bubbles break, that middle class disappear. That's a very unpleasant moment. They start to realize that, well, it's not real. The spatialization of time first and foremost happened in the 20th century theoretical physics, actually, when Einstein brings time as a new dimension and he invented the concept of space-time and bring in time into the coordinate system and discovers that actually space-time, this coordinate system, can actually be distorted, be twisted. It's like a tower on the table, and you put the ball in the center of it, and it sinks and it twists space-time. I'm not suggesting it's wrong. It's proved correct. It's completely correct. It's completely no problem to make this assumption, bring this concept in analyzing some physical phenomena in the universe. But the spatialization of time could make a very bad metaphysical implication in the field out of the theoretical physics. Treating time as a mutation of space is an attempt trying to deprive human being of his inner self-consciousness. Time can never be treated as an external thing that is homogeneous to space, as long as time concerns our inner consciousness, inner intuition. Actually, Immanuel Kant himself said, well, you can think of time by making an analogy, to space. Like in your imagination, you draw a line, that the process in which you draw a line in your mind, and it feels like you're drawing time, and then you're trying to represent it in a spatial way to draw time, but it must only stay as analogy, a way to help you understand it in some certain ways, but it never means time itself. It's an analogy, but it never represents any quantities of time itself. Actually, Einstein read Immanuel Kant's The Critique of Pure Reason when he was a child. He get highly influenced by Immanuel Kant. And then he learned to actually play the trick of the game between space and time. It was precisely Immanuel Kant's The Critique of Pure Reason that gave inspirations to Einstein's invention of relativity theory, including specific relativity and general relativity. Actually, some other theoretical physicists, especially some who engage in writing science fiction, like to invent higher and higher dimensions. We think that of three dimension is definitely too little, and we bring in time. We have 4 dimension, and then we have 5 dimension, or 6 or 7, 8, or even more, 10, 11. In order to explain this high dimension existence, they make up stories that draw an analogy. It's like when higher dimension people look at us, or it's like how we look at their paintings, the people on their paper, like a picture, it's like a giant. It's like how we step on a paper, how we step on a paper, and the paper is 2-dimension, and these higher dimension creatures, they step on us. It's like how we step on the paper for these 2-dimension creatures. This is absolutely anti-intellectual, and this is theology. This is theological metaphysics. This is not science. It's not too different from the medieval times. This Catholic preaching trying to brainwash people about these heavenly creatures, etc. They put our 3-dimension sense to a so-called higher dimension creatures, and just suppress us into 2.5 dimension, something like that. This is just a mind game. I believe the real metaphor, the real analogy they want to make is that we are the 1% super wealthiest financial capitalist, and we can just kill any one of you from this 99% so easily, like we step an ant on a paper or something. It's so easy for us. You're just like an ant on a 2-dimension paper for us, something like that. That's the real message they want to deliver to you, actually, but they don't say it straightforward. In Immanuel Kant's The Critique of Pure Reason, he explains how imagination bridges understanding and sensibility. It's about how human mind works. It's about how we see things, how we create concept of things, to make them become, to make them into our consciousness, to realize them, to understand them. And it's by means of imagination. When we imagine, we actually hold something from our given senses through space and time, by means of categories from our understanding. And these categories are something pre-existed in our mind, even before we were born, even before we get into the experience. There are categories like quantity, modality, etc. There were 4 classes of categories, that in total 12. For example, we see 1 apple on the table. This 1 apple, one comes from our a priori categories that pre-existed in our understanding without touching the senses. And the word apple, when we say it, we construct this concept with certain unities that brings these senses of redness or hardness, softness, and other quantities, hold them together under all the categories existed in our understanding. And this process is imagination that bridges understanding and sensibility. In his detailed explanation, he brings in some new terminologies to make it better explained. He says something like apprehension, apperception, schemata. Let me explain a bit. The word apperception means the synthetic activity, means the synthetic activity a priori that holds things together, that holds the given apprehension together, and makes it into concept. And apprehension means something in our, it feels like something in our subconsciousness that we already feel is there. It's in our mind, it's there, but it's not very clear, and we are not paying attention to it. It feels like we are sleepy. We're not paying attention to anything. And the moment we start to pay attention to things, and we realize, and we use the activity, the synthetic activity of apperception. And this synthetic activity holds what he called the manifold in the apprehension together, and generates concepts, and we start to realize things by means of scheme, and in the plural form, schemata. Well, I'm not going to go further into a more detailed explanation of how Kant's terminology works, and how he reacts to people's certain doubts and confusions, because it could get you even more confused. That's the problem of Immanuel Kant. Actually, the first moment you read him, the first moment you hear from his fundamental concepts is quite clear. Actually, it makes all the sense. This is very beautiful, actually. But the more you go to details, the more you get confused, actually, and the more people start to argue about their own explanation of Kant's terminologies. And it's what I want to say here is that the apperception, the synthetic activity a priori of apperception, is like the strong rhythms in music. Nowadays when you hear music, it's boom, boom, boom. It's like apperception. But the problem is this pure rhythm doesn't bring anything. It doesn't fill in the melodic contents. Then it's empty apperception. It's not like in the 1970s music. You hear the rhythms, or sometimes you don't even hear the rhythm, but rhythm is there anyway. But it's full of emotional, sensible contents in it. Then apperception is just a framework you have to feel contents in. In the 1970s popular music, you had a lot of contents, a lot of real human emotional, truly contents. But nowadays, I see less and less contents, and sometimes no contents at all, but pure framework of apperception. There's a span of apperceptions in the popular music, in the DJ music in our time, and there's a missing of apprehension. There's a missing of real, truly emotional contents. Another problem is that, according to Immanuel Kant, apperception should come from spontaneity of consciousness. Actually, it's from yourself. It's spontaneous. It's spontaneous. But when you hear this rhythm, like it's not spontaneous from yourself anymore. It's an external design, a staging of a certain set of apperceptions. It feels like Nazi soldiers, like marching. But even in classic parading music, they do have some melodic contents that fill in the gaps of these rhythms. But nowadays, it's in many cases zero, actually. When apperception becomes external and constantly repeats itself without holding any emotional, human, truly melodic contents, it starts to create a hollow in your heart that could lead to the congestion of a potential emotional expression or emotional cultivation and emotional purge. The pure repeating of rhythms can also make some sort of purge. It is more like purge of stress, of pressure, in a very violent and hateful manner, actually. And it can be addictive in some cases when you're used to this sort of form of so-called music to purge your stress and anger. When the moment you stop listening to it, you actually get more stress. Stress comes back, and it's a little bit like drugs, but not that serious. It's a little bit like that. Another problem is that it doesn't really digest your inner stress. It doesn't really digest it. It replace it with something addictive for that short moments. But later, more stress could be created from it, actually. It's also a temporary moment of forgetting things, to lose yourself in these strong rhythms with others, and you forget about everything else in your life. All the stress, all the pressure, all the unpleasant things you don't want to deal with are gone. Your mind becomes blank, but it's only temporary. As I said, it's only temporary. It somehow reminds me of how Nietzsche describes Dionysian art in his Birth of Tragedy, that when people form a group and dances with this music, it feels like the boundaries between human being are gone. The boundaries are removed, and you become one unity in this frenzy, and this is the spirit of wine, the spirit of god of wine, of Dionysus. But I want to say that when this moment is past, when music stops, the boundaries come back, and even stronger, and even much stronger than ever before. Then you have stronger human boundaries after you remove it in this temporary relaxation. Actually, it doesn't surprise me that in our time in the West, you see a lot of hatred, hate crimes, hate speech, hatred, frenzy, intolerance, and blind irritation, blind fury, etc. I really see it a lot in the West, actually, and the people cannot help with it. They cannot control it. It's because the mechanism of emotional catharsis is gone from them, is deprived of them. It's so sad. If you can constantly practice the art that balance reason and emotion, you wouldn't get polarized so easily. Actually, I'm talking about this topic in a quite compassionate way. I don't want to blame anyone. I don't want to accuse anyone. There are many people in the West that they are just victims of the capital-controlled culture industry. They could have lived a much better life with a balance between reason and emotion. They could have reached much more happiness. And it's not material. It's not material. I think people in the West understand what I'm talking about, because people in the West have enough material benefits. It's what really tortures them is something in their mind, it's in their mentality that has something to do with emotion, with a balance. Now I want to come to the second part of this video. It's about language. It's about how the Chinese language holds the balance between emotion and reason. The Latin languages are motivated and purported by logos, but the Chinese language is motivated and purported by both logos and eros. The Latin languages are logical languages, but the Chinese language is a tonal musical language. It bears the same fundamental logical part as the Latin languages, but its essence, its identity, is not the logical part, but the tonal musical part. The tonal musical part. And this is something very special about the Chinese language. When you talk about Taoism, you talk about yin-yang. It doesn't sound special for you. What's the difference between yin-yang and Hegel's thesis and antithesis? I mean, well, feels like it's just different words, a different symbol, right? No. If you hear from the Chinese language, yin, yang, well, that creates a completely different feeling, meaning. Let me give you another example. When you say hello in Chinese, you say ni hao. Many Westerners know to say ni hao in Chinese. But the problem is, this wrong. It's wrong. What is ni hao? What is ni hao? Tell me, what is ni hao? It doesn't mean hello. As a Chinese, if I take it seriously, I don't understand what you're talking about. What is ni hao? Ni hao literally means a mud and a rat. That's what you mean. What is a mud rat? You are a mud rat. You're ni hao. The correct pronunciation and toning is ni hao. Ni hao. It bears a strong emotional realization and emotional sincerity. So when we talk about Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason, we talk about the philosophical realizational process in the consciousness, the philosophical realization in the form of how apperception, apprehension, schemata works. But when we talk about speaking Chinese language, we talk about emotional realization that bears a strong emotional sincerity and emotional expression. I give you another example. Some Westerners and some Chinese, they say 谢谢, 谢谢. They think this is thank you in Chinese, 谢谢. I can tell you, this is not how you say thank you in Chinese. This doesn't mean anything, actually. The correct term to say thank you is 谢谢. 谢谢. It's an affirmative tone going down to humble yourself and stay in that humbleness. You wouldn't be able to say it correctly without the emotional sincerity and emotional investment. So there's some Western people who say 谢谢谢谢. I can tell you who say 谢谢 in China. It's those uneducated teenager thugs who had very bad manners and attitudes, and they never say thank you to anyone. And in some cases, their parents or whoever force them to say thank you, and they say 谢谢谢谢谢谢谢谢 in a very reluctant and unpleasant way, without toning. They refuse to put tone in it because they know the moment they put tone in it, the moment they put emotional investment, emotional sincerity in it, and that's something they refuse. It's something they refuse. So in certain sense, all the Westerners, as far as I know, who believe he can speak Chinese, when they speak Chinese, they all sound like teenager thugs to me in China. So it's impossible to teach you Chinese if you don't have emotional sincerity. This is something fundamental about the Chinese language, the emotional sincerity. So when I say, I like to eat potato, I say, 我喜欢吃土豆. But if you listen to a Western Chinese learner, and he would always say, 我喜欢吃土豆. I say, no, sorry, you're wrong. It's 土豆. And he said, 土豆. I had enough. But there's a small chance that you can successfully learn Chinese as a Westerner. And the moment you have successfully learned it, you would be like, wow, this is so fantastic. You would be able to reach a kind of thing that is similar to emotional catharsis that you would otherwise only obtain from music. It's like when you speak German, you don't feel any emotional expression or emotional catharsis in it. Like, for example, you say, Guten Morgen, Guten Morgen, like a robot. But if you put it in a song, like, Guten Morgen, Guten Morgen, Guten Morgen, Sonnenschein. Well, that feels so different, right? The Chinese language is a language that already bears a musical, emotional catharsis in it without making a song for it. It bears a musical, emotional catharsis already when you naturally speak this language. It is like music. In Latin and Germanic languages, you also have tones, but it's very poor. You only have 2 tones, in my opinion, and it's very simple tone. It's not complicated. It's very simple tone. Like yes, yes, what, that, what, no, yes, that's it, that or that. You have a binary tone. You have binary tone system, and this is very dangerous. Your emotion is easily polarized into this extreme or that extreme, because you only have 2 tones, this or that. What? The modern Mandarin Chinese has 5 tones, and the ancient Chinese had 8 different tones. And all the Chinese tones are complicated tones, and it's not simple tone. It's very complicated. It offers you an emotional, realizational process, which is comparable to how the German language offers you a philosophical realizational process. Chinese tones bear very strong musical tendencies that it tries to restrict, actually. Because if you don't restrict this musical tendency, then every single Chinese sentence would naturally develop into music. It reminds me of in my childhood, there was Chinese craftsmen who walk on the street every day to offer service to sharpen your knife and scissors. And in the beginning, the guy would just shout in Chinese, sharpen the scissor, like, 磨剪子, 磨剪子. But time after time, this naturally develops. It naturally develops into something like 磨剪子嘞，枪才多. And this is an example of how Chinese language, Chinese sentences without restriction would all naturally develop into music. So the Chinese language naturally has very strong musical tendencies, but the fact that it puts restrictions on this musical tendency is to make sure that the emotional catharsis or emotional expression, wherever it goes, must stay within the control of reason. But even so, speaking the Chinese language alone can already offer you all kind of musical emotional catharsis or musical feelings. It somehow feels like a gear that bridges reason and musical emotion. It's like it's like clutch. It's like clutch. You know, when you drive a car, a manual car, when you release the clutch, oh yes, it's on. The gear is on, and you drive. It moves. Every time I listen to German classical music, I always think of Chinese poems, Chinese proses, ancient ones that can that tells exactly the same thing, actually. So in certain sense, I see the German classical music as an interpretation of ancient Chinese poems. The funny thing about the German language is that this language is so rich in logical perfection, but so poor in tone. This language is always spoken in a robotic, mechanic way. When I speak German, I feel like I'm a robot. I'm not a human being. I'm a robot. I sometimes I feel sorry for Germans. I feel that their musical emotions are being suppressed so much by this language, by their language, actually. But if something is suppressed so much, it will eventually burst out like volcano. That's why Germany was so rich in classical music. Let me tell you something. I'm a big fan of German classical music. I'm a big fan of Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, etc. I'm a big fan of concerto, symphony, sonata. But at a certain point of my life, I became an even bigger fan of Schumann and Schubert because they invented sound circle, or Liederkreis in German. I'm a big fan of it because it brings poems and music together in a way much better than ever before in the Western history. It's the closest thing to the ancient Chinese poetry. when I listen to Schumann, I got all the feelings that it comes from Wan Yue style in Song Dynasty in China, which was 11th century. Wan Yue style in Chinese can be barely translated into romantic. It's not an accurate translation, but it means something similar to that. It's also interesting that Schumann style was labeled by German as romantic. When I listen to Schubert's Winterreise, I really feel like I'm listening to poetry from Song Dynasty in China. It's like habe ja doch nicht begangen, dass ich Menschen sollte schein, dass ich Menschen sollte schein. Welch ein törichtes Flammen treibt mich in die Wüstelein, und treibt mich in die Wüstelein. Wan Yue style was not the most favored style in Song Dynasty, because it's always sad. And Chinese poetry, first and foremost, didn't worship sadness, actually. I mean, it has this kind of style, but it's not favored. I mean, it's not mostly favored. The funny thing is, in the West, Romanticism is also not favored by everyone. For example, Nietzsche criticizes very strongly of Romanticism, and he sees it as a sign of decadence. He hates it, actually. The funny thing is, there's a Chinese female poet whose style was very similar to Schubert. And she writes, 寻寻觅觅，冷冷清清，凄凄惨惨，戚戚。乍暖还寒时候，最难将息。Well, this is a description of the sadness, the humbleness, in both her mind and in the environment, and the climate, the weather is also kind of cold and sad, and it's difficult for her to fall asleep. Actually, I did a bit research before. A lot of German poets in the 18th and 19th century were highly influenced by the ancient Chinese poets, actually. They admired the Oriental poets so much, actually. The Chinese language can express your emotion fully and accurately in a realizational and sometimes dialectical tonal process. When you talk to someone, and if you can express your emotion fully, you wouldn't have grudge. You wouldn't easily fall into fight anymore. The reason you fall into fight is because your emotion is suppressed, is not expressed fully. You only expressed your logical meaning, but you fail to express your emotional meaning. This is a big problem in the West. You see, many Western people, they have hatred, and they talk to someone and they easily fall into fights, and because they finished their logical meaning, but they didn't finish their emotional meaning. They cannot express their emotional meaning when they talk, when they speak, and this suppresses them so much. It creates grudge, hatred, and unspoken congestion of emotion, which could later lead them fall into physical violence, or if there's no physical violence, it's just pure hatred, when you listen to many Western people from both left wing and right wing, you feel that they don't mean what they literally mean. They don't mean what they literally mean. They mean something else. It's emotional meaning, but they can't show it. They can't express it properly with their spoken language, and it tortures them. It feels like I have some part of my skin itching, like I want to scratch it, like, oh, it's itching, but I can't touch it. I don't have a hand or something. So I say, oh, please hit me. So in English, you have two tones, and you have a binary emotional expression. Then you get polarized emotions. You get polarized this extreme or that extreme emotions and swaying and very fast in between. Yes. Oh, what? But in Chinese, you have modern time 5 tones and 5 swerving tones, changing tones. It's not tones like what. It's very complicated. It's swerving tones that makes a very huge difference. Very huge difference. It makes everything different. Believe me, these seemingly very small thing changes everything. It changes everything. And in the ancient China, they had 8 different swerving tones. You know, the scientists have done experiments before. They put classical music in train stations, bus stations, and then they discover the crime rate suddenly becomes much less. This is the power of music. This is the power of the musical regulation of emotion. It changes your mind. It balances your emotion. And if you can express and balance your emotion whenever you speak, it makes you more like a human being and less like a fascist zombie. It also will create more natural connection between you and others, including strangers. There are many people in the West like to make mockery of Chinese language. They say, oh, Chinese, that's ching chong, ching chong, ching chong, or ding dong, that's Chinese. That's not Chinese. You are making a raw mockery simply because you don't have it and you can't speak it. And deeply in your mind, you're very jealous. And you're jealous of the fact that these people can express their emotion truly, sincerely, and fully. But you can't. And by the way, they are projecting themselves actually. Like if you say ching chong or ding dong, actually this is English. Only 2 tones. This is English. Chinese has 5 tones. You are projecting yourself. It reminds me of the teenager thugs I saw in my childhood, that they are jealous of their guy who can sing very beautiful songs in the schools, in festivals, and the guy sings in front of everyone very beautifully, and everyone likes it. But these teenager thugs, they can't do it. They are just jealous, and they just do like, you know, that many people in the West, their mentality is just like a child, is like teenager thugs in China, so to speak. Now I want to say something interesting. In the West, many people know yin-yang from Taoism. And you also invented something similar. You have Leibniz, who invented the binary system, and you have Hegel. You have Hegel, who invented the dialectics, thesis, antithesis. It may be considered as similar to yin-yang. The problem is, if you only know yin-yang, but you don't know wu-xing, then you get big problems. Because yin-yang goes hand in hand with wu-xing. If you don't know wu-xing, you would never understand the dynamic balance between yin-yang that, you know, you would just end up with a binary thinking, like Hegel. Wu Xin, if you translate it into English, is 5 elements. It means 5 elements: gold, wood, water, fire, earth. These 5 elements are the fundamental elements that consists of everything in our universe, in our life, in ourselves. It doesn't literally mean the chemical elements, because according to modern science, you already have a diagram of elements, then very precise. The 5 elements, it's more metaphysical. It's more metaphysical, and it's a way to classify things. It's a way to put things into certain categories, to make it easier to research them, to relate them. Actually, it's a way to build relations, and this applies to Chinese philosophy and also many other fields like Chinese medicine, also Chinese music. Actually, now here's something I want to explain with interest. The Chinese music system is a 5 notes system. It's unlike the Western 12 note system. It's not do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, and with some flat augmented notes. No, it's only do, re, mi, sol, la. That's it. 5. It's not like the Chinese didn't discover the other notes. They did discover them, but they don't like it. They don't like those notes that were not harmonious, especially in the ancient times. And if you are the musician that work in the palace, your job is to make very harmonious music, and because it's not music per se. It has something to do with the rituals, with the politics, with the culture in general. And eventually they decided that we must apply this 5 notes system. Well, in ancient Chinese, they don't call it do, re, mi, sol, la. They call it gong, shang, jiao, zhi, yu. 5 notes. Let me tell you something. Don't underestimate the 5 notes musical system. It's more powerful than you can ever expect. All the powerful religious music in the West is made of 5 notes musical system. You guys know Andrew Rieu? Is a Dutch composer. He makes himself popular. There's a song. I will follow him wherever he may go. There's not a mountain so high. And later he puts fa and she only in transitional part to make it more smooth. There's not a mountain so high, there's not an ocean so deep, la 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 la, so far, so. And the other part, I follow, na 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 na, so do shi la so la la. And I can tell you why he put this fa and she in these transitional parts of the song to make it more smooth. That's because this song was originally made for a young girl, for a little girl who was at a very young age fall in love with a boy at her age, and this was supposed to be her natural emotional expression. This is a loving song. It's not a religious song in the first place. But Rio promoted it into a religious song later. This is just to appease the church, to appease the religion, the Christianity. This is something I hate most. The religion steal people's natural emotion in their natural life and put it in religion to redirect your natural emotion to another direction, to something else, to something unseen. A more typical example of 5 notes religious song is Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace, so do do mi re do mi re do la so, so do mi re do mi re mi so so mi re do la so. Another example is the Dvořák's Going Home. The Czech American composer who wrote The New World. Going home, mi so mi re do re mi so mi re. But in the later parts, he put a she actually. Na do shi so na, na do shi so na. But it doesn't matter because this song, the fundamental part that actually grasps people's emotion is the 5-note system. And the she is just a kind of a development, like an accessory, like a transitional part, a little bit, and then it goes back, going home. The 5 notes religious song was not typical in the West, in the old days actually. It looks to me that this trend starts with the rise of America actually. The old days musical system was related to the Catholic Church, and they certainly didn't prefer 5 notes. They must have fa and she in it in order to create kind of melancholy, sadness, the tragic feeling is quite gothic. So I'm thinking the 5 notes musical system may have something to do with the Protestant in America. Maybe. This is my guessing. I haven't done a complete research on this topic actually. And if you look at the red songs in communist China in Chairman Mao's time, they wrote a lot of red songs to glorify the country, to glorify Chairman Mao and Communist Party at the time. All the powerful songs that make people totally engage in them emotionally and practically are the 5 notes songs. The most famous one, Sun is reddest and Chairman Mao is the dearest. It's like 太阳最红，毛主席最近，哆嗦瑞哆啦嗦，哆嗦咪瑞哆嗦，嗦哆咪啦嗦咪哆，咪咪 so, do, la, so, re. It can grasp people's deepest emotion and raise people's religious instinct. It's like how seed grows in the sunshine. The moment it sprouts. The 5-note system offers a perfect harmony between yin and yang and offers 5 supporting points in their perfect position. Then yin and yang can transit smoothly and slowly, like the sway of a clock, like this. Not like the Hegelian dialectics that goes like Another fact is Chinese lived very prosperous and harmonious times for thousands of years in Chinese history, and in some dynasty for consistent 300 years, people lived very happily and harmonious. And this memory goes to their DNA. It's being carried on from one generation to another. And even till nowadays, they still have this DNA that bears this memory from the ancient China. So when the 5 notes harmony works, it triggers something in the DNA of Chinese. That's why it's very powerful. It's powerful beyond your imagination. In the end, I want to talk something about the Chinese characters, the Chinese letters, actually Chinese words. It's very different from the Latin letters. Chinese letters are hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics are letters that are invented in terms of the shape of the objects. So in Chinese, the letter tree looks like a tree. The letter water looks like water. The letter bird looks like a bird. The word turtle looks like a turtle. And this offers you a very rich input of sensibilities. Whenever you think in terms of Chinese characters, Chinese letters, your sensibility is always tightly connected with the actual things, not abstract things, but actual things. When you read the Chinese characters on screen or on a book or wherever, it's a completely different feeling from, for example, how you read English sentences. Completely different. This is why many Chinese people prefer reading novels to watching movies, even when you have a movie that has very perfect 3D effects, computer technologies, etc. It doesn't matter. It still cannot be compared with when you read Chinese characters. The sense, the imagination, it rises. It goes beyond any 3D movies. I think of something. I was talking to a Dutch mother before, because she told me that her daughter didn't like reading, but then she bought some books from bookshop that makes the word with funny shape, that if a tree trembles and he draw the word tree, it feels like a picture trembles, and also when the book mentions a wall and he writes the word wall, like really like a wall stuff, and then it suddenly starts to attract her daughter to read the book, and And then I told her that in Chinese, you don't have this problem. In Chinese, your kid would automatically be attracted to read these words. And it doesn't have to be deliberately decorated in a cartoon way or whatever. One big problem in the West is that many people like abstract talking, abstract discussion that is completely detached from realities, detached from your senses, from the real things. And this could create many problems, because if you are so used to discussing abstract ideas without revoking the sensibility, you would eventually become delusional. And this was also once a problem Heidegger talked about. He said, like, in the modern time, you look, if you watch TV and you heard in the news someone died, or someone died, you don't feel anything. And also for fascists, what makes them so monstrous is that they dehumanize others. They replace others with a kind of symbol, that is detached from sensibility. Then and you don't feel anything anymore. That you get rid of someone, and you just feel like you get rid of a dirt or something, because you don't have senses, so you don't feel any pain, you don't feel any empathy, you don't feel like any human feelings. That's why, in my opinion, the constant revoking of one's sensibility is essential to make a human being human. So the Chinese language, the written characters, bears a constant revoke of sensibility. And when you read Chinese letters, you're at the same time creating a universe, a galaxy in your mind that is attached to the reality. That's the point. It's attached to the reality, to the real world, to the real senses of the real thing. Not something abstract or religious in the sense of an unseen heaven or whatever. No, it's not like that. The Chinese characters can also be seen as the perfect example of how apperception holds apprehension, how imagination bridges understanding and sensibility, in terms of Immanuel Kant's terminologies. Actually, Immanuel Kant criticized so much of the religious, of the theology of his time, that it always goes beyond human experience. It likes to judge transcendental things like the region of universe or and stuff that we don't see. That because Kant actually refused to make judgment on the things that are beyond our experience. It doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous. And in my opinion, that why the Western religion likes to do these things is because the Latin language, the Germanic language trees their characters. They don't have the function as the Chinese language that can hold the sensibility in a very tight, strong way. You always lose it. You always lose these senses. Then you use your human categories to judge things beyond your experience. If you do hold your sensibility in your experience very tightly and constantly, you wouldn't have the habit of always going beyond experience, because you have something that always. Then why do you throw it away and enter something you don't have? I may talk about this topic or in a deeper way at certain points in another video, but today I decided to stop. It's already too long. It's too crazy for me to make this video actually. I thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.